Coming at you all the way from Arbitrum, it's the Magic Hour Podcast.
This is Alum.
Dionysus.
And Breaker. Produced by Digital Strategies Guild. Listeners of the Magic Hour Podcast, we have a great, exciting guest for you today. Karel from the Treasure team, the Chief of Operations, is here to join us and tell us all about what's going on in the world of our favorite DAO. There's been a lot of updates, so we're excited to dive into it, if you will. Karel, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Before we dive into what's going on with Treasure, because I know there's a lot, I kind of want to get a little background about you and how you got into Web3. We usually do this with a lot of our guests, but what was your journey into crypto and how did you discover it? When did you discover it?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it's been actually more of a kind of adjacent exposure to it, and as a full dive, I'd say kind of fairly recently into kind of Treasure, but also just kind of NFTs overall. So I mean, this is probably closer to I think where I'd previously come from, which was kind of working in VC, and I think it was something that we were in the process of actually launching a fund around, and so we had a number of investments, and so it was all something that was more so in the background, but not something that I'd say kind of formally operating within. And so it was something that, had paid attention to it, kind of got into it from a more kind of adjacent trading perspective back in 2019. And then NFTs, I'd say kind of like mid half of really last year, where I, kind of really went headfirst into everything. And so, kind of catching up in a lot of ways with just kind of education, spending more time and kind of what was happening within, really just DeFi overall, NFTs. And I think Treasure was one of the, I'd say kind of, certainly Loot. And then subsequently Treasure was one of the first projects I really leaned into after the fact. But kind of before that, it was more so on the sidelines as I was observing and casually kind of trading. On the kind of prior life piece, was something that, yeah, it was always something I wanted to take a bit into, but I was spending a lot more time on kind of more traditional Web2 investing, and just spending time outside of that too.
That's really interesting. When you were in your Web2 environment, was there a particular industry you guys were focused on, or was it just kind of just investing in what you guys felt were going to be interesting companies to invest in, or unicorns, if you will, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time at that shop. Well, it was a kind of multi-strategy asset manager. So we spent a lot of time in a number of areas, but fintech and kind of financial services was one of the core and key focuses for them. So I spent kind of 6 years with them. There were a number of different arms. So everything from a almost a kind of startup studio or venture studio where we were building, companies within kind of fintech and everything adjacent to that from the ground up. And then we had a more traditional VC arm, which was, also investing in fintech. We were beginning to dip our toes into kind of crypto, Web3. And, we also had kind of credit, private equity, royalties, et cetera. So pretty diverse kind of mandate across the board. And, of course, very large teams that were focused on all those different areas, given how diverse it was.
Wow. Awesome. And I understand, when you say it was pretty adjacent, because it seems like it's just a very logical step if you're already in fintech, that the crossover is definitely there. So that makes a lot of sense. What was the first NFT that you purchased out of curiosity, or were attracted to, if you will?
Yeah, it was the very first. It was something that eventually ended up rugging. It was just like, I think it was this 3D sort of like bear that looked, I don't know, super, super cool at that time. Zero fundamentals went into it. And it was more of a, well, this looks cool and I like the art, so I'm going to go for it. And I'd say, my experience and track record as a trader is probably not up to par with many in the community. So that was the first. And then, kind of the whole Treasure wave shortly after. but certainly also wasn't as close in line to, a lot of the, I'd say, early community members who started with loot bags and, ended up coming over here.
I was definitely one of those early community members. I remember getting my first treasure bag, but before then I had dabbled with a number of NFT projects before then, but it's good to hear your story. And I think that there's something to be said about liking the art and appreciating that in some way, because I think that that's part of what's attractive about NFTs as well. Like if you appreciate like a piece of art that you have, it means more to you knowing that you own it. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, between the art and the community kind of like underlying that, a lot of the things that, give it some sense of identity and attachment. I think that's what a lot of people certainly resonate and, kind of keep you around, even if the project is maybe not faring well or, is taking a bit of going through a bumpy kind of time, in the market.
True. True. So when you joined the Treasure DAO team, how did that come about? Had you known John previously? Did someone connect you to? What was kind of the genesis of that whole relationship?
Yeah, it was. I didn't know the team personally. It was so coming from, again, kind of prior life in Web2. I was spending whatever little time I had, in the evenings of the week or weekends to really just dig in. And so found Treasure, was a kind of community member. And, over Christmas, I decided to dust off my coding skills. So I went to school for computer science, ended up dropping out, did some time in kind of product and just engineering before I eventually kind of made my way to more of the kind of operator, but like kind of on the investment and VC kind of side of things. So it was something that I missed and just being hands-on and also seeing, hey, what could I kind of build with them? And so ended up launching this thing, I think like a couple days after Christmas during my break, called Treasure Tools. And so it was really designed as, the missing kind of piece of, the NFT ecosystem here at that time, which was just a rarity tool. So initially kind of supported small brains and everything else that kind of built on top of that. And so really from there, I ended up spending more time just building stuff. So kind of like light data things. I launched the, Treasure Docs, the official kind of documentation eventually. And so, yeah, just, ended up building things that I thought were kind of needed and tried to kind of repackage what I had understood as the kind of Treasure vision and ethos and, what they were kind of looking to build. Began to spend more time with the team. Eventually, just decided to, quit my job. I spent 2 months going back and forth and spent a lot of my time actually, talking it through with my peers and my partner and CEO at that time to see if it made sense. And it did. So joined full time in March and I think the end of March, and the rest is history from here.
As they say, I didn't know that you were the original creator of Treasure Tools. I really I remember utilizing that dashboard well early on. Awesome. That's really cool. And I wasn't aware that you were as much of a coder as well as the de facto kind of operations leader that you've become. So that's really great to hear as well. I'm actually just trying to learn how to code Python right now so that I can kind of understand Solidity a bit better and get more into that side of tech, because I don't come from a computer science or engineering background, but I find it extremely interesting and I want to learn more. So that gives me a little bit of hope hearing about your path. So thank you for sharing that. And before we dive back into Treasure and what's going on in the ecosystem, I wanted to ask, John's always referred to Treasure as kind of the Nintendo of Web3. And I think we're all kind of aware of what it means to be a play to earn type of game. But do you have any gaming influences? Were you ever a gamer when you were younger? And if so, what were those influences? What do you recall are the ones that really kind of cemented your interest in this particular, I guess, industry or world, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that definitely informed, why I think leaned in. And I never had thought that I would work in gaming. It was always more of a pastime and just, fun thing to kind of do on the side. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, I grew up, I'd say, can't remember the first game. It was probably one of those cereal box games that, they used to come with CDs. But yeah, I mean, I think most informative to me growing up was probably StarCraft for me. And so, something I remember, playing with my brother. And yeah, I mean, it was loads of fun. And, I think also very strategic as well. And so I think as you probably have heard from, other, I'd say kind of business leaders, I know Toby from Shopify also has played a ton of StarCraft. I think beyond that, a lot of the kind of RPGs. So, I mean, still within that Blizzard umbrella, played a lot of Diablo, played a lot of kind of JRPGs as well in the lead up to things. And I think it's probably something that is maybe more akin to, I think, what we can get out of Web3, which is, I think a lot of the work and time that you put into those games to then at the end of the day, be rewarded or kind of feel like you've earned something and that you can kind of take it from really all of that time you spent kind of building it up within that one game and taking it outside of that. And so I think a lot of that certainly resonates with kind of how, I mean, I personally kind of view things. And yeah, I mean, I think I haven't really picked up too many games recently, I will say. I did play a lot of StarCraft 2 when it came out and, for a couple of years kind of after that. And then, yeah, a lot of kind of RTSs. I'd say a lot of, now when I do get a chance, it is very much, I'd say almost kind of like mindless, more casual open world games where I can just kind of immerse myself, explore, have fun, and not really think about and have to kind of compete or try because I am doing that on a daily basis with everything we're doing at Treasure.
Wow, that was a great answer. And one thing that I can agree with you was that I also was a very big Blizzard guy. And, for me, it's a little disappointing to see what has happened to the company. I think they lost a lot of goodwill amongst gamers these days, but that I grew up playing StarCraft and StarCraft 2 with my friends, so I can share the sentiment there. But that's cool that you're kind of just like chilling in open world games. I think that's where a lot of the metaverse kind of idea is going towards. So I really like hearing that. And I think that makes a lot of sense too. But thank you for sharing. And it was very interesting to hear about all that. Now, as we dive into this update to the Treasuredao ecosystem, I kind of broke it down to a couple different things. But before we get into them, I want to know, considering the current state of crypto in general, I guess the macro, if you will, how are you feeling overall about what's been shipping with Treasure, Arbitrum, the Ethereum ecosystem? What's your barometer at the moment?
I'd say feeling quite good. And I think part of this is just looking at, I think the pickup of, not just, I think the magic price, which, we never try to spend, too much time paying attention to. But that's been kind of turning around. And I think a lot of it, in part, I think certainly macro network, a lot of eyes on Arbitrum. I think what is in our control, in our hands, is everything that we've done to kind of ship and, I think kind of speed things up and, release things that, kind of across the board from Bridge World, which I'm sure we'll get into with the harvesters, to kind of Smallverse, to Trove, and et cetera, and love to jump into all of that. But I think, those are the things and the factors that we can kind of control. And so, I think as we look into certainly the fall, there's a lot that is in the pipeline that, we've been working hard on, getting ready to put out there into the world. And yeah, I mean, I think it's very close to coming to fruition. And so those are kind of elements that we're all excited to have out there. And, I think part of this has really been around, one, going from our early days in the journey all the way through to now, it was a loot derivative. We launched, Magic. We gave everything away for free. It was fair launch, free mints, launched on Arbitrum, proved out our thesis, or beginning to, with the launch of Bridge World and Smallverse. And now we have kind of the set of 9-10 games that are kind of like all built on top of Treasure. And so, a lot of the foundation setting has been kind of happening all, and I'd say a lot of it, that I'm really focused on is like from an operational perspective. So how did we kind of go from that time frame through to where we are now? And a lot of it was building the team, putting in place a lot of the processes and things that we needed to kind of better scale all, and also kind of focus on, I'd say, the right things to get us to the next stage of growth. And so in terms of, going from where we are with the foundation set to really scaling things up as it relates to, I'd say, a couple of areas, builders and game studios, game devs, there's that really large piece that we've been really ramping up. And then there's the player side of things, which, is tied to a lot of the things that, I kind of initially talked about with, I'd say generally kind of Arbitrum, but also, with a shift in terms of kind of away from more, I'd say, unsustainable kind of P2E, play to earn, into things that are a bit more delightful, which and sustainable, which, we think will kind of come as our games mature and they start to roll out their more higher fidelity kind of immersive, fun experiences, which ultimately is what we're all about. So I'd say all of those different things, which we can certainly unpack, are, I think are good factors to lead us all to be bullish about the future of Treasure.
I mean, I'm pretty bullish just on the fact that you said there are 9 or 10 games in your stable. I think that for me, one of the things that I always look at as a sign of success is like the network effect and how much activity is taking place and how many people are transacting within the particular ecosystem or utilizing the token. So I think that I'm pretty, for lack of a better word, bullish on Treasure as well, just from that alone, because I think that that's really important. Like, to have 9 or 10 different developer or studios working hand in hand together to develop this, I think is really important and positive. So I think that you make a very good case on why people should be bullish. Did you find it kind of difficult to help, I guess, or build to scale with all the different projects that were kind of blossoming over the early months of Treasure and when you got started?
Yeah, I'd say it was more around, I think, putting in the right ingredients for us to be able to scale. And so we had moved from a model kind of early days at Treasure. And I think it's probably important to kind of reclassify that. And so we have kind of this core Treasure team, which, are responsible and actively kind of working on building, growing, maintaining Bridge World, Trove, Smallverse, and everything kind of in between that, which is more of the kind of like the tooling, the infra, and all that stuff. And then there's the other piece, which is everything kind of outside of that, who we still kind of work with quite closely, which is our ecosystem partners. Games like Battlefly and Tales of Illyria. There are other non-games like Magic Dragon Down and others who are kind of in the mix, and so there's an element there, and so I'd say internally, within the core of Treasure, we had moved from a model where we were relying on kind of shared resources, and so folks who were devs or designers or artists were kind of moving in and out and between different kind of core products and verticals who we were working with. And so there's an element where, given the pace and pickup of everything that we were doing within Treasure, and, I think it was something that, we probably should have scaled up to meet the needs and demands earlier on. And so, I'd say a lot of my job, I think, back in March was hiring. So we really built out the teams and ended up growing it significantly and also refocused some of them to some of our kind of team members such that they are, singly focused on delivering across, one kind of product or vertical. So we ended up standing independent teams across the board. And then we have this kind of like a layer that sits really underneath all that, which is, folks who can and should likely, split their time across the board. So things around, the economy and game design, marketing, distribution, partnerships, everything around just like, operations, finance, all the kind of, boring but important stuff.
Kind of like that enterprise support team that you would need to help out a whole bunch of different singular projects.
Exactly. So it was a shift in some ways to a model like that. That would allow for, kind of one, I'd say, and this is probably what everyone cares about within the community, is for us to be able to ship faster and ship more interesting and meaningful products. And then separately to that is, for us to, also not get burnt out because, it's tough to wear a lot of hats and not everybody can go and do that. So we went from that, built a lot of that up. It takes time for that to begin to mesh well. And I think anyone who's built a company or even a team, I think can appreciate things like that, where, you have to kind of unravel some of the dynamic first before you can really kind of, figure out how to work best together. So fast forward, I think to now, we've had a lot of those dynamics play out. A lot of, I'd say the tooling, the, kind of important things to really work distributed in an effective way put in place. So, we are working globally. And so time zones aside, everything else is I think, super fun. And, we have people in, Australia, the US, the UK, Germany. I'm up here in Canada. And so pretty, good split and distribution across the board. And so working to kind of put all those things together.
Yeah, I can imagine it's extremely challenging, but fulfilling when it all works together. And I'm really glad to hear that it sounds like things are really synergizing. So thank you for sharing that. Before we get into the harvesters and the other topics I want to discuss, I wanted to ask one more question as it relates to the gaming in general. I think when we spoke with Garp, he kind of hinted at he felt that mobile was the ideal kind of medium for the future in terms of where people would be playing these games. Do you agree with that sentiment? You can also decline to answer, but I'm just interested because, this is why I'm asking this question. I personally don't use my mobile device often for Web3 interactions. I guess I'm a little like nervous from a security standpoint, although I know that MetaMask is on my iPhone and there's never been any issues about it, but at the same time that's one of the things that I think about. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely would agree with Garp. And I think part of this is from a accessibility perspective. And, I think if we think about gaming and what has really electrified the kind of adoption of it since the kind of advent of, the mobile phone, it's definitely something that, we and Web3 overall shouldn't skip over. And so that said, there are probably different profiles and types of games that lend itself to better mobile experiences. So I think there will be a place for everything. But I think, for games that do tap into that audience and are, super accessible and easy to pick up and play, mobile should be part of that strategy. And it's certainly something that, while we don't currently have a live game within a Treasure kind of ecosystem that has or is built for mobile, it's something that, we either see as coming or we are, looking to and in talks with, potential partners who have that as a kind of mobile first priority for them. So certainly 100% agree. I think, there's room for everything. And, but that said, it's I think the other layer to it actually is really around the technology too. and the kind of on-ramp and onboarding experience for players, which, of course is not quite there yet. Especially for something like Treasure, which, not only is it on Ethereum and, it's on an L2, which you need to bridge to, and then you have to swap to a token, which is Magic to acquire, which, and we've seen, I'd say, an increasing amount of, I think supporters and providers who have begun to support Arbitrum, which is exciting. And, folks like Rainbow Wallet and others, who we've kind of worked closely with to provide that experience. I think it's just a matter of time before the friction that is currently present is reduced or minimized and eliminated. And we have a few things that we've been spending our time on to get such that you may not even need to know that you are on the blockchain. And I know a lot of games are moving, into that realm. And then same thing on the Magic front, for it to be as seamless as you just being able to log in, abstract away your account, but still be able to tap into, these experiences that are kind of native to Web3.
For that answer, that sounds exciting. And, I guess I can understand what you're saying about, wanting to reduce the friction and accessibility reasons, because the way I understand it is mobile is far more developed in the Eastern world, like mostly in Asia, than it is over here. So I guess I think that makes a lot of sense. But enough about Treasure as a whole. Let's talk about some of the recent updates. So I know that one of the biggest things to have been launched recently was the harvesters. Originally when the first Bridge World white paper was released, harvesters were in my opinion, kind of hinted at, but they didn't really expand on exactly what harvesters meant to Bridge World, what type of game we would be playing with them. We only understood that they would produce yields different from the Atlas mine and that we would have to craft parts and build them. How difficult did you find developing the harvester module or program to the original vision, and what features, if any, had to be compromised in developing that?
Yeah, I'd say, and this is something that I am more than certain someone like PETA on our team could dig into much more and better than I could, but or Bahama for that matter. But that said, I'd say, and I think part of this was more of a shift in terms of the general design and I'd say overall kind of use case for harvesters and the emergence of, what Bridge World and these kind of harvester mechanics have ended up kind of playing out to become. And so I think initially, it was almost, I'd say kind of focused generally around, resource allocation and acquisition, which, Bridge World ultimately is kind of all about, at least at this stage. And so with it playing the kind of core and key role within the Magic and Treasure ecosystem, it's where Magic is minted and, everyone is ultimately fighting for their share of Magic. I think when we initially released the game guide, I think a lot of this ended up playing out to essentially turn into what we ended up discovering, which was more of this kind of games as guilds emerged to essentially kind of try to acquire as much magic as they could. And so we've seen this kind of play out in the mechanics with harvesters, but also I think as Bridge World has evolved to be almost less of a game and more of this gamified infrastructure of which things are built on top of. And so it now kind of in a lot of ways consists of these different DeFi like kind of protocols that is powering Magic and powering the Treasure ecosystem. And really the harvesters are turning into these things that can be used and leveraged to be built on top of. And so, really for games to ultimately kind of compete to control these harvesters, and we can use this as a testing ground for games to emerge and for us to really understand, how they are tapping into and building atop the Magic economy, but also to, for them to be able to tap into this from an incentivization perspective, such that, they are being able to accrue and game magic that they can then use within their own games. But it's more of a way, from the name of Bridge World now, for it to act as the bridge between the worlds that these games are creating. And the harvester kind of mechanic, which, we're kind of calling the harvester games, can be built, to allow for this kind of cross-pollination and intersection of games that can come together, battle it out for the harvester within Bridge World, but take, the yield and the rewards that they can get from the harvester mechanic, and bring it over to their game. So I'd say, part of this is, and I think we had the initial vision for harvesters to be a bit more canonicalized in terms of the storytelling and lore that the shape of these products could take form within the Bridge World kind of overall story. But I think as this has played out, it's in some ways taking a bit more of a backseat to really allow for the community to kind of open up their imagination to allow for, a general understanding of this, what harvesters are, and then tying it through to, how these games could build on top of this infrastructure that is Bridge World to kind of, create these different elements. So bit of a shift. I think, did it play out in the way that we thought it would? I think yes and no. And it's really, I think, been an evolution of that original thinking from the, original master game guide.
Well, I think that's only natural too, because a lot of what's going on in Web3 as a whole is kind of, we're figuring out what works, what doesn't, what's possible, what isn't. And I think that it makes sense that there definitely would be some evolution. So I'm not too concerned about it. It sounds like it's the harvesters are a means for these games to use their popularity as a way to fill their treasuries to further their own in-game ecosystems. That's correct, right?
Yes, exactly. So there's that component, and there's, I'd say, for it to play a role in this kind of cross-game economy, such that the Bridge World NFTs can still play a role, and could there be games that use this mechanic of competitiveness to also kind of build their own games that take the shape of these harvester games, and so I think I'd liken it to Bridge World and harvesters as this overall kind of set of IP and brands that games can use to build on top of, but are really built for other games to compete within. And so it lends itself to this further, I'd say, interoperability that could emerge between games, of which Magic is really core and central to everything.
Wow, I'm excited to see that play out. I think that sounds exciting for people who have been in this ecosystem, but also very promising. And we'll see what happens in the future. But it sounds like you guys are on the right track, because I don't think there's really anything like this in any other real play to earn or gaming, Web3 gaming economy right now. So I think that there's a lot to like about that.
Yeah. And I think there's, there really is no other, I think, ecosystem that is using a single token and having, I think, a diverse set of games, all of which are incentivized to use the token, in our case, Magic, while still having potentially their own token on top of that. And I think, really the approach that Treasure as a whole, which, in kind of connection to that Bridge World, which really is the center of everything, we're all working towards, I think, this kind of model in which, this rising tide will lift all boats. And, the boats in our case are all the games, but then all the players who are participating across the board. And so I think, it's with this, overall mantra and ethos, which, Treasure was really built upon, of being kind of course, free to start. It was a fair launch. It's really bottom up, working with the community across the board, and so we're hopeful that we're never going to lose this.
I am as well, and I think I love your use of the analogy, a rising tide lifts all boats. I use that one all the time, by the way. I think it's a very apt analogy, especially in this type of ecosystem. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of promise. I remember when Trove was the initial idea for this treasure-based marketplace, and it was supposed to be separate from the actual treasure marketplace. I understand that it made more sense to build Trove as the de facto marketplace. Since it launched, it had, in my opinion, a very successful launch. We're starting to see it take off as more projects get integrated into the marketplace, along with ones that are on L1. I love the way that you guys built a lot of the games into the marketplace, such that you can just basically go there and it's a one-stop for everything, whether you wanted to play, trade, you name it. Trove is where you basically should be going. Now that it's kind of gotten its legs underneath, you've kind of solidified the existence of it. What are you looking forward to with Trove, and where it's going to go from here?
Really good question. Maybe it helps to set the stage of its starting point a little bit. Sure. we had launched the Treasure Marketplace initially, very aptly named, as the de facto marketplace for the treasure ecosystem, only using Magic. Given the traction we had saw from that, we ended up looking to launch a separate marketplace, which was going to be denominated in ETH. And this was really to capture the universe of projects that may not have wanted to, list and be denominated in Magic. We also wanted to keep that curated, and then also to capture everyone else who was on Arbitrum, because there was really, I'd say, no generally kind of great NFT marketplace experience that, in our mind, that kind of provided that level of support. So we ended up unifying that, turning it into Trove as our marketplace. And we launched it, I think, mid-June. And we added almost, I think, close to daily sort of updates, bringing it up to feature parity with the Treasure Marketplace. Mm-hmm. And, just added on a whole bunch of things, including kind of built-in rarity support, I think, over the weekend. And so, I think it's set the foundation and the stage for a lot of really what projects and collectors and traders and players, gamers need in a marketplace for NFTs. I think what we're excited for really, and it's always been framed as this, Trove is the personalized and gamified NFT marketplace. And, that component, I think candidly has been lacking because we've been setting everything up to allow for that. L1 support, as you said, was also built in, and I'll touch on that. But I think it's, as we look to the next step and stage of Trove, it's really to lean into those different aspects around personalization and gamification, really with the goal of ultimately kind of creating this gaming destination for treasure. In a lot of ways, the marketplace is the entry point for anyone to participate in a game and acquire the NFTs. And, unless you were around to mint the project. And so, we have always had a view and vision for it to almost serve as the Steam to our ecosystem, mm-hmm. where, you can enter it, and this is where, it's your one-stop shop for everything. So be it, the assets and the items that you might need to participate and, continue kind of advancing within these games, for there to be curation and, aspects that really surface what is interesting to you as, an individual. And if you're someone who, and this is with a long view in mind, when, we have a really diverse and large ecosystem of games that, really span different genres, different titles. And so it's important for us to be able to provide you with things that you ultimately will care about. And so curating those kind of recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Using this from a builder's perspective, and why you would want to kind of launch not only on Treasure but also on Trove itself, is for us to be able to surface something that I think no other marketplace really does well, which is for you as a game, building this out so you can really get a sense of like analytics, distribution, your sales, your cost of acquisition, interoperability, especially if that is a big component of what we're touting, which is being able to use not only Magic but also your tokens via our AMM, the other kind of resources that might exist in other games. We've seen that play out where someone like a Realm or Tales of Lyria have worked with other games in the ecosystem, and so this interoperability is really kind of key for us. It's really not, I think, and this is looking at the landscape of NFT marketplaces. Will we ever compete with an OpenSea and LooksRare in the same way that they are? Definitely not. And I think it's really understanding that, and for us to be vertically focused on gaming, and for us to be singly focused on really enriching the experience for our games and our players within the Treasure ecosystem. And so all of these different things that are linked to gaming, being able to surface it within Trove. We've seen this play out with some of our recent L1 additions, and being able to drive attention to certain things like these starter kits or loot boxes that you could get from trading on Trove. You can kind of see this one day playing out so that you can earn and be able to tap into that, so you can start playing with a bit of an edge from within the game that you're playing. Badges and achievements that could be surfaced within the game that eventually you then go and can see everything together on Trove, and it's built in a native kind of experience as well. Certainly, I think within the backgrounds there is, I'd say, quite a bit of kind of NFT, GameFi, DeFi infrastructure that is in the works too, on top of everything, that will provide you not only as a gamer but as a trader, and that level of experience that you might be hoping for. And given the importance of these resources, the 1155s that exist within our ecosystem, we've been spending a lot of our time with the great folks at kind of SudoSwap, NiftySwap, as well, as we think about the place that those sort of infra tools may exist as kind of modules that could power this general collective experience as it relates to NFTs. And of course we have our AMM, and so having all of these different things pulled into what Trove ultimately could represent. But first and foremost, it is a marketplace to power this destination for gaming on Treasure.
I love hearing all that. One of the things that sticks out to me that I just want to address and acknowledge is you mentioned this a number of times. You talk about focus and keeping people focused. And, like you said, you don't want to be the OpenSea or the LooksRare. You'll never be them, which is fine. But just recently I was reading an article about focus, and one of Apple's biggest successes was that Steve Jobs always talked about how you can have like the greatest idea, but you have to be able to say, I don't want to work on that right now because I'm focused on this, even though every inch of your body is like, no, we have to work on this great idea. So I love that you talk about focus, because I think that that's something that is lost on some other projects who just want to do everything. And without any type of focus, you might not ever build a product that is what it should be. So I really appreciate hearing that. I love the idea of the kind of curating the recommendations. Is there someone that kind of looks at the different projects that you want to bring onto the marketplace, and do you guys vote on them? Is there like a DAO related to this particular activity? Is that something that you would want to implement in the future? Or is it just like, if you're a game that wants to integrate Treasure or Magic, then your ecosystem, you're welcome to join Trove?
Yeah. and I think this is the beauty of the blockchain, but really anyone can build using Magic and Treasure and integrate all of this any way they want. I think in order for it to, in some ways, be an approved sort of project, I think we have to curate them, and we have to make sure that we're working closely with them such that, we can provide them with that built-in sort of support. And, for us, if we wanted to work with them to emit magic or treasures into their game, having that kind of take shape as well is really important. And so right now, what it looks like, and we have this, and this is all, I'd say, pioneered by, Garp, one of the co-founders, in all this. And so we have this ecosystem integration framework where, we spend a lot of our time, just understanding and getting to know the team, the game loops, the different kind of, the projects that are coming to us with a desire to build in, magic and treasures and to bake it into our ecosystem. So it starts there. And, we've seen, and part of this is, really understanding where Magic fits into their game. And over time, we've been, building our capabilities such that, we brought in, of course, PETA, who spent a lot of his time on just the economics of everything and ensuring that we're building a sustainable and, enduring ecosystem around Magic. Having that kind of understanding with their game and everything that they're building, we brought in, a few game designers who really take a look at it and assess whether or not this game is fun. Because, even if it's designed perfectly, if it's not fun, it is, it's not going to attract anybody. And so there's just, I'd say a pretty thorough process of which we kind of assess a game. Obviously, I think we're spending a lot of our time, and there's, I think, dozens and dozens of games that we're speaking to, many that we're very excited about. We had gone through this first cohort earlier in the year to, essentially have our current suite of games that are in the portfolio. And, thinking and working with them to, again, design those different elements of, kind of magic sinks and faucets, treasures, the NFTs, this fostering the interoperability between games that, happens on an ongoing basis and all of that. So it's all, everything is kind of playing out from that lens. As we look into really the latter half of this year, or latter part of this year, can't believe it's September.
I know.
Yeah, so we are excited, I think, to diversify a little bit, because I think there's a common theme and thread between the games right now, but there's a lot that who we're speaking to that are creating really differentiated experiences that are things that are kind of in like the battle royale, like first person shooter kind of genre. There are others that are in this kind of like RPG kind of bucket, some that are creating these like really solid experiences and great graphics and all that stuff. One that I'm really excited for personally is, this game called Hovercats, which, coming from a Treasure OG, still early on, we're still trying to figure out how to work together and where magic and treasures come to light. But it's this almost like hyper casual Jackbox like experience where, it's super accessible. Anyone can pick it up. They had this recent kind of campaign and sort of early launch of their product where, they had partnered with YouTube to power this kind of game on experience that they have. And so they had the world's fastest crossword solver versus the world, where, they would all kind of compete and play the single crossword to try to figure things out. And so, having like an experience like that is easy to pick up, will help to also, from like a free to play and mass market perspective, also brings a lot of eyes and attention into something like Treasure itself. And so, there are so many others, Ruffian Reborn. It's a kind of deck builder sort of, strategy game. You have the Beacon, and we're speaking to them and have I think an AMA on Thursday this week. They're building a roguelike dungeon crawler game. And so I'd say like there are many that are slated for our next cohort of games to be launched quite soon. And so we're excited for that to take shape. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that, we will work with these teams. We will take intros. I think spent a lot of my time now on kind of partnership calls to really understand, how we could work with these teams. And, I think for someone of our stature and I think, in some ways, humble beginnings to be considered alongside, with Arbitrum, alongside, a Polygon or an Immutable, I think is quite telling that, more and more builders are paying attention to and see the value proposition of building with an ecosystem versus going it alone, even if you may be able to tap into, a bit of a kind of grants or, a kind of ecosystem fund that others might have. There's more to it than just that.
Right. And I mean, I know what you mean because I'm an EtherOrcs holder, so I know that they're very big on the Polygon chain. They've been shipping a lot of stuff, but they're just one game, it's them basically. Whereas with Treasure, there's so much across the board that, if you're coming here, you're automatically going to be able to get support or tap into those resources that you talked about. So I understand what you mean by that. Also, I'm very interested in Hovercats. When you said Jackbox, it reminded me of during the pandemic, I used to get my friends together and we would play Jackbox games over the internet. And I really enjoyed how easy it was to get it all set up because a lot of my friends who play these games, they're not gamers. They don't have Steam. They don't know any of that stuff. But when I was like, listen, all you gotta do is bring up this link on your phone and enter this code, all of a sudden they were in and playing and they were loving it. So I'm very interested in that, and that's great to hear that there's a whole new cohort of games. I'm looking forward to that. Question about MouseDev. How did he end up joining the team, and what's his role going to be like?
He was brought on, and we announced him, I think, a couple weeks ago. I mean, we've been spending some time with him, and he's been doing some contracts, smart contract development for us. And, he's a great individual, really, been a key kind of innovator within just on-chain NFTs. And, I think that's kind of played out. And so we're excited to have him lean in. He'll be initially primarily focused on kind of Bridge World and a lot of the, different kind of harvester games and, other kind of related Solidity kind of requirements there. But certainly, he's been doing some work on the Smallverse side of things too. I think for someone like him, there's certainly, I think, we definitely want to work with him to the fullest kind of extent that we can. And so we're excited to have him on board.
Well, before we get into the Smallverse stuff, I just want to say that I always thought that MouseDev had a really great opportunity as a smart contract auditor in the broader Web3 world because he always seemed to, or they always seemed to know what was going on with the smart contract challenges that were popping up. And I also have an affinity just because I was a participant in the original Anonymized Mint, which might still be one of my most entertaining experiences in Web3 and NFTs. Just that whole minting and burning and, the gamification of the whole mint where you had players trying to burn their mice to prevent others from being able to buy more mice with cheat. It was just an incredibly interesting and entertaining experience and really kind of demonstrated what potentials there were for, I guess, different types of games that may not have been explored before. So I thought that was really cool and innovative. And I guess, you talked about the AMM. Do you see eventually there being, I guess, exchanges for something like a Cheeth or maybe even like a Zug from EtherOrcs being able to be traded in the AMM that would be integrated into Trove with Magic? Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, and we've been playing this out with our AMM Council, which does comprise of some community members and leaders as well. So it's something that I think, initially the thesis was to have it support, really all of the games that are built on top of the Magic and the Treasure ecosystem. But for, really any other party who may want to, tap into that where Magic is the base pair, certainly I think we wouldn't be opposed to it. I think there's a question around, it being on Arbitrum versus kind of like ETH-L1 or some other kind of chain or network. But I think that's something that we can kind of play out as well as we look at just kind of the cross-chain capabilities of it.
Right, and I think that a lot of that may work itself out once the merge takes place. Am I correct there?
Hard to say how that will play out. I think we'll it's coming soon, so we'll see if everything goes swimmingly. I guess there is a question of the compatibility, and I think for us to again like that, this is really designed as a way not to replace a sushi swap or Uniswap. It's really to be captive and core to be integrated into just Magic and our ecosystem in itself. But could be potential there.
Right on. The one other thing that I wanted to talk about was Smallverse. I'm just gonna kind of share my thoughts on this. It's Smalls were one of the original projects on Arbitrum. I regret that I never drew a monkey, even though I was in the Small Discord from day one. So I never got a Small, but they definitely captured a lot of Web3's attention during that early on stage where they were telling the story and the rocket. And I remember Gary Vee was getting involved. I even heard from someone, I think it was in one of the last podcasts we were recording with LifeDAO, they had gotten their families involved in this type of thing. And he wasn't the only one. I believe Treasuredao also, when I met him at the recent NFT NYC event, he was telling me that his whole family was involved in Magic and they always talked about it at the dinner table. So I didn't realize that it had captured the zeitgeist as much as it did. But where do you see Smalls fitting into the broader Bridgeworld ecosystem? Do you see them getting a resurgence? Do you see them continually or having this type of flagship or kind of centralized NFT status still? Or is it just going to become another game in the suite, so to speak?
Yeah. So I think that the way that we think about Smallverse is, Treasure is the decentralized Nintendo, Smallverse is our Mario. And it is, it has turned into something that was, picked up this kind of significant like IP and brand sort of following. And, you mentioned a lot of the names there. I think certainly there was a period of time where, it was kind of topping the charts of, just kind of like NFT trading activity earlier in the year. And I think the initial mechanic for it was super innovative. I think at that time, it was non-custodial staking that, John and others on the team pioneered. And, we've seen that kind of, used in other projects. I think what has turned into and what this is shaping up to become really is in the same way that something like a Mario has different expressions of the game. You have Super Mario World, you have Mario Kart, Mario Party, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think for something like Smallverse, there's a huge opportunity for it to play out where, the core NFTs, the small brains, small bodies, et cetera, they can be leveraged and used in an assortment of games. And we've seen, and a lot of our focus, I think, has been really setting the foundation for a lot of this to play out, where there's, I'd say, almost this kind of like infrastructure is probably too dull of a word, but the Legos and the building blocks that could help to power those experiences in a more meaningful way that is fully on chain, that allows for, really the expansion of these sort of things to play out. And so we had partnered with, the great folks at Treasure DAO earlier in the year. And this was at the Treasure level where, they were going to work on this game called Project Bilbo. It was unknown, not named yet. And over time, we ended up turning this and working with their team to see how we could build really the Smallverse game that was able to tap into the IP, the brands, the community that was already there. And it just made total sense. Mm-hmm. So we partnered with them, and this will take the form of really the flagship title that will be built on top of Smallverse. Will it be the only one? Probably not. And so there have been a number of, wheels spinning on the Smallverse side of things. So whether it's the, this, I'd say flagship kind of title, triple A kind of like in quality, it will take some time to come to light. But really the approach to building it is in working with the Treasure team, really building this game is a game in itself. And so really this bottom up approach to, kind of this creation of the game, the storytelling, world building, doing it in a way that is really engaging, that brings a community in that you really could not do back in the Web2 days of building a game. Mm. There's the other aspects of these enabling building blocks that will set it up for success as it leans further into this kind of stature as, I think the de facto sort of blue chip of the Treasure ecosystem, more from a kind of like brand perspective. And, and there are a number of, initiatives around, kind of this racing game that we've talked about and the ability for us to tap into things like that. Mm. We've seen, the interoperability kind of play out as well. And, we've looked at, and if you are familiar with the Bridge World Harvester kind of game guide, game paper, there's an allude to this small invasion where, the smalls are invading and trying to take over a harvester and could be one of the first few recipients and participants of the harvester games. So seeing that also play out as well. So a lot of different, I'd say, expressions and where this could go in the long term as well.
Well, that's very exciting. And again, I wish that I might have to go look and see if I can buy a small. That again, I still don't have one. But I know you're kind of limited on time. I appreciate all the time that you've given so far. I did have just a couple more thoughts. I'll make them brief. But you talk about staking. Do you think that there's ever a time where staking just becomes an automatic thing within maybe not just Bridge World or the Treasure ecosystem, but in Web3 as a whole? Like, because it seems like no matter what project it is, there's always a staking component because obviously people want their assets working and generating some level of interest. Do you think that we ever get to that point where things are automatically staked if they're not being used, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess it's a good question, and I think one that probably opens up regulatory scrutiny, and in the sense of it, in some ways, accruing interest or a dividend is something that is probably not something I want to dig into on this call.
That's fair.
So, but that said, I think it is a core kind of game loop and mechanic, and I think we definitely don't view anything we're doing as a play to earn kind of it's really not at the core of what we do, and we've never had I think a lot of the unsustainable sort of APRs and things like that have been I think baked into a lot of different games as well. So I think it certainly won't go away, and more so from the kind of, I think, overall purpose of it being, a core game loop and something that can kind of live and, be used in other, kind of game titles. And we've seen this play out in a lot of, the games that we have, within our portfolio. I think there's probably a way for it to be even more seamless and even for us to, for instance, so one thing we've talked about before is, for there to be a treasure chain, which I guess is another topic that we could dig into for a while. But, we could imagine a world where, if magic is the core chain token, and gas token, could there be a way such that if the costs are minor enough and you've provided the approval for it, that you could just transact and use and stake and play in a way that is fully seamless and that really doesn't require any kind of transaction or approval process to make happen, so it can power really high fidelity experiences that you may already be used to in your Web2 days, because you don't have to interact with your wallet, and so things like that I think are interesting for us to be able to lean into, and so I'm sure we'll see more of that, especially now that we've seen negligible and kind of like material cost savings on already Nitro with Arbitrum, but also there are other factors where they have Arbitrum Nova, antitrust chains, right. Things that could be useful and helpful for Treasure long term as well.
All right, thank you for sharing that, and that was great. I didn't ever think about like the idea of a treasure chain, but that makes a lot of sense when you kind of described it the way you described it. But obviously that's for future stuff. Final question. Ethereum merge is coming up in probably around 2 weeks, I think, is what basically where we're kind of looking at, or maybe even less than that. But as a team that's working on Arbitrum, are you guys kind of just, is there any level of concern? Are you guys just proceeding as nothing's going to change on your end, or is it kind of a let's wait and see what happens? What's like the kind of, what's everybody feeling right now, or how are you guys proceeding knowing that this is coming up in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I'd say generally business as usual, but keeping a really close eye on how things play out. So I think it's exciting. I know the industry is buzzing across the board, but I think for us and we are very close with the Arbitrum team as well, and so really understanding and educating ourselves on how this will kind of play out over the long run is something that we're keeping our eyes peeled on. So that's kind of where we are with it.
Cool. Well, Karel, it was fantastic talking with you. I appreciate everything that you shared. You definitely gave me some insights into things that I had not expected, and so I really appreciate that. I hope that we can do this again in the future. But for now, thank you for being open and honest, and we look forward to speaking again.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Breaker. Really appreciate your time being on here, and also love everything you do to really lift up this everything that is happening within Treasure, because there's a whole lot of it, and I don't think anyone would know without folks like you covering it all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. I hope everyone enjoys what we do, because I do. But thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and talk soon. And that concludes another episode of Magic Hour, friends. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you can listen to your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at Magic Hour Pod. All the links are found on our link tree, which is in the show notes. From all of us, we appreciate your support for Bridge World.